I just gave my wife a kiss for Easter. Now, you don't know how difficult, not kissing her is, but doing anything like that in public is. She says to me every Sunday when we're here, you have to give me a kiss from the front row. And I just say today, I thought I would just be brave and kiss her without being asked. So I did that. But then when Gus said, now that you said hello to one person, I thought he was going to get me to kiss somebody else. But,
I didn't say kiss.
Actually, speaking about Easter eggs, some of you may have seen, we had a very stressful situation happen at our place. I, for the first time in many, many years, actually bought chocolate Easter bunnies, way ahead of time. And I thought, well, we need to hide them, because otherwise I'll eat them. And so I hid them in a very, very safe place. And then I couldn't find him. And I spent hours searching the house for these bunnies. And then finally Erin got wind of it just the other night. This is on Friday evening. And she said, oh, Dad, what's going on? I said, oh, I bought some Easter chocolate, for you guys. And I can't remember where I put them. And I have looked everywhere. She found them in 5 minutes flat. So I was very, very, very impressed. So I should have done that right at the beginning, because obviously she was a lot more motivated than I was. Actually, I was really motivated. I'm thinking, I can't believe I've lost the eggs since I bought them way ahead of time. Today is Easter.
Yep.
I love Easter for a lot of reasons, chocolate being one of them. But the most important reason that I really love Easter is because it gives us an opportunity to address, actually, is my clicker anywhere around? On the chair, underneath the chair? It's with my eggs, yeah, that's right. It's with my bunnies. I love Easter for a lot of reasons, but the most important one is because it gives us an opportunity to address the foundation of our beliefs and the reason we are followers of Jesus in an increasingly godless society. Now, if you've known me for any period of time, you know that I love unchurched people, I love our local community, and I really enjoy talking with self-professed atheists. And I find my discussions with them, for the most part, stimulating and thought-provoking, and I enjoy testing my beliefs up against their objections and arguments. After all, if what I believe is true about Jesus and God, it can stand up to a little bit of rigorous debate. Yep. As I say here at Grace all the time, don't ever be afraid of tough questions and be honest enough to admit when you don't know an answer. It doesn't mean that God isn't real, it just means that God's bigger than you. It's impossible for any of us to know everything about Him. So if there's something that you can't answer about God, that's perfectly legitimate. If you could answer every question that anybody's got about God, then I would question whether you actually are serving God or you've just simply made up a God in your own image. Now, the Bible is a great start, but it's limited. There's no mention of social media or the internet in the Bible, but who knows that one of the greatest challenges facing parents today is how they help their kids navigate a world of instantaneous information. Some of it's fantastic. Who's got that alarm going? Whose alarm is that? Some of it's fantastic, but some of it's horrific. Now, whilst I enjoy talking to atheists, there's something that I've noticed creeping into the debate more and more over the past few years, and that's the tendency of some to equate the Bible with other mythical pieces of writing about imaginary heroes of old. In fact, whenever Easter and Christmas rolls around, you'll hear people talking with quite a lot of authority in their voice about the pagan roots of these two most important celebrations on the Christian calendar. There's just one major problem with that line of thinking. Jesus of Nazareth. One of the common objections that I hear to my belief in God is that there's no proof of God's existence, just as there's no proof for the existence of dragons or fairies. Now, straight away, by mentioning God in the same sentence as dragons and fairies, doubt is sown about the veracity of God's existence through association. It's a very clever debating tactic. If you're not careful, you can get drawn into the faulty logic and start to question whether you've just been fed a made-up story along the lines of Santa Claus. In fact, they'll often use the jolly red-nosed philanthropist as an example of how little children can be convinced that a make-believe character is real. But they're forgetting something very, very important when they do. Jesus of Nazareth. They're forgetting the fact that Jesus is a historical figure and that the roots of Christianity are centered around factual events that took place in a real geographical location on our planet 2,000 years ago. What makes it even more convincing is that the life of Jesus was recorded in non-Christian writings, and the birth, life, and death of Jesus isn't questioned by historians as factual. There's more evidence for the existence of Jesus than Julius Caesar, Aristotle, Plato, or any other character from antiquity that you'd like to suggest. And no one questions their existence or the story of their lives that have come down to us through various writings from their age. Now, why do you think they push back against Jesus and not others? Because if Jesus and the events recorded about him are real, then they have ramifications for all of our lives today. The others don't. And that's a huge difference. The popular historian Will Durant, himself not a Christian, wrote concerning Jesus' historical validity, "The denial of the existence seems never to have occurred even to the bitterest Gentile or Jewish opponents of nascent Christianity. And again, that a few simple men should in one generation have invented so powerful and appealing a personality, so lofty an ethic, and so inspiring a vision of human brotherhood would be a miracle far more incredible than any recorded in the Gospels." Now, it's a substantial thing that a historian who spends his life considering historical facts should affirm the reality of Jesus' existence as well as the rapid growth of the early church. The Anglican Archbishop of Sydney, Peter Jensen, had this to say in a newspaper article about Easter. He said, "To celebrate Easter each year, and it's one of the few events in all of human history that is celebrated every year, is a very powerful reminder that the Christian message is a historical one, found right there in the dirt and muck of the world." His last statement in his article summed up the truth about Easter for all of us, believers and non-believers alike. "I think that what Easter really does is it turns the light on. It lets you see the world for what it really is in brilliant colour." Now, what did he mean by that? Easter lets the world know that there is an overarching purpose behind our existence, and we're not just a series of random accidents that occurred over a millennium on a planet that just so happened to be the right distance away from a yellow star. As my atheist philosophy professor rightly pointed out in class one day, if God doesn't exist, then there's no overarching purpose to our existence other than our personal survival. Easter debunks the idea that life has no purpose other than the living of it. Why? Because of the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was killed and 3 days later came back to life. The only reason that Christianity exists today, this is the only reason, is because the resurrection of Jesus actually took place. The only reason that I can look you in the eye and tell you that there's a purpose for your existence that goes beyond the grave is because Jesus proved he was who he said he was through his resurrection, which he had spoken about before his death. As one character in the motion picture The Case for Christ said, "If the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen, then the Christian faith is a house of cards." Now, there have been many movements that have started up around the teachings of charismatic men and religious gurus over the centuries, but Christianity has never made a claim that its existence came about on the back of a great theory or insightful teaching. Jesus predicted his death and resurrection, and he based his authority, the authority of his teaching, on his future ability to come back to life after his crucifixion. Now, that's a fairly black and white claim, if ever there was one. He either came back from the dead or he didn't. Either every claim he made about himself is true, or none of them are. H.B. Smith said, Christianity begins where religion ends, with the resurrection. Now, I love this quote because it shows the difference between every other world religion and Christianity. Some people say, well, what's the difference between Christianity and all these other religions that we have? Well, that quote shows the difference. Up to the resurrection, you could say that each major religion is on an equal footing. But after the resurrection, only one is left standing. Only one religion bases the veracity of its teachings on the death and resurrection of its founder. Only one religion can offer hope that goes beyond the grave with any sense of authority. Therefore, only one religion has the credentials necessary to talk about life before death, as all of our life on our planet is leading us to the doorway to the next. And the one who has control over and actual experience of what happens next obviously has the most authority to talk about what happens now. Jesus said he was God's Son, that he'd come from heaven, that he was the only way to God the Father, that by believing in him we could have eternal life. And he said that he would prove each of those claims by coming back from the dead 3 days after he was killed. In John 2, 18 to 22, Jewish leaders demanded of Jesus, what are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it. All right, Jesus said. Destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. What? They exclaimed. It has taken 46 years to build the temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days? But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Now, that statement of Jesus obviously weighed on the minds of the Jewish leaders, because in Matthew we read that they went to Pilate right after Jesus had been buried. The next day on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, Sir, we remember what that deceiver once said whilst he was still alive. After 3 days I will rise from the dead. So we request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first. So disprove the resurrection and you dismantle all of the claims of Christianity. And it becomes no better than all of the other man-made religions on our planet today. Now please note the lack of effort by the opponents of Christianity to disprove the resurrection. When I'm debating with atheists, they never talk about the resurrection. They always talk about this invisible God who we can't see. They don't talk about the resurrection because they realise that when they start talking about the resurrection, they're actually talking about historical facts that has evidence to back them up. The silence is almost deafening. And just to say that it couldn't have happened, therefore it didn't happen, flies on the face of the eyewitnesses who were there and who said it did happen, and then went on to give up their lives because they were convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus came back from the dead. Have you ever wondered why there's no logical rebuttal of the resurrection available? Have you ever considered the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? Here are what a few prominent thinkers of the past have to say regarding the evidence. Brooke Foss Westcott, a famed scholar of the 19th century, said, there is no historic incident better or more variously supported than the resurrection of Christ. Dr. Paul L. Mayer, a prominent professor of ancient history, stated, no shred of evidence has yet been discovered in literary sources, epigraphy or archaeology that would disprove that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was actually empty on the morning of the first Easter. Epigraphy means inscriptions, where you inscribe things on stone or on metal. I had to look that one up myself. Dr. Simon Greenleaf, a Harvard University professor of law, said, according to the laws of legal evidence used in courts of law, there is more evidence for the historical fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ than for just about any other event in history. Dr. Frank Morrison, an English lawyer, decided to take 3 years off from his law practice in order to try and disprove the resurrection of Jesus. After 3 years of intense study, he found that the sheer weight of the evidence compelled him to conclude that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. As a consequence, he wrote his famous book, Who Moved the Stone? By the way, he became a Christian. Bart Ehrman, a prominent New Testament scholar who's outspoken about his agnosticism, that just basically means he says he doesn't know, right? States, what is certain is that the earliest followers of Jesus believed that Jesus had come back to life in the body, and that this was a body that had real bodily characteristics. It could be seen and touched, and it had a voice that could be heard. One of the criticisms of the resurrection is that, they were just hallucinating. Well, you can't touch a hallucination. You can't hear you can hear it in your head, I suppose, a hallucination. He was talking, but you can't touch a hallucination. But the early disciples were convinced that Jesus rose in his physical body, and he didn't just come back to them as a ghost. Here are a couple of thoughts worth thinking about. After Jesus' crucifixion, the disciples were scattered and hiding in fear of their lives. That's recorded for us in the Bible. After the resurrection, complete transformation. They were boldly going around declaring in public that Jesus had risen from the dead and accusing the people who had sentenced him to death of killing the Jewish Messiah. Now before, they were hiding from them. After, they were accusing them of killing the Messiah. What brought about such a radical change, if not their eyewitness to the resurrection? Now before the resurrection, the disciples needed faith to believe Jesus' claims about who he said he was. After the resurrection, they didn't. Because they now had facts to base their belief on. You don't need faith to believe that Jesus was who he said he was. You just need to examine the facts, because the facts paint a very clear picture. Faith is about the future. What we're talking about here are facts that have happened historically in the past. Big difference. People say, you just got faith in Jesus. Well, actually, no. I've got faith, if you want to call it faith, in facts. Things that have actually occurred. Things that actually happened in the past. If Jesus was still dead, wouldn't the religious rulers and the Roman authorities have produced his body to disprove the assertions of the disciples? I know that the Jewish authorities most definitely would have. The Romans may not have been all that interested, but the high priest and the council, they would have definitely produced his body if he was still dead in that tomb. And that would have been the end of Christianity. All of the first apostles, including the Apostle Paul, bar the Apostle John, were put to death because of their belief in Jesus, or because of their belief that Jesus was who he said he was and that he had come back from the dead. Now the question is, would you put up with torture and death knowing that what you believed was a sham that you were foisting on your followers? You know, some people will change what they know to be true under torture, but none of them ever recanted their belief in his resurrection. How could they? They witnessed it with their own eyes. Paul himself wrote in one of his letters to the early churches that if the resurrection hadn't happened, then Christians were to be pitied above anyone else. They're not the words of a man hanging on to a delusional thought, but rather the statement of a sane man who realised the true ramifications of what he knew to be fact. So what does that mean for us here today? If I could have used those back there, great. It brings us back to the question posed in the title of my message. Who do you say I am? You see, our answer to that question has the power to change the direction, the passion, the purpose, and the significance of our lives forever. Because if we truly believe that Jesus is who he says he is, then our lives have purpose and meaning that go far beyond our simple survival. The future is assured, and we realise that the grave isn't the end, but a transition from this life into the next. And I'd much rather be following the teachings of someone who's already been there and come back than any of my atheistic friends who haven't got a clue. The gospel truly does change everything. And today, if you've never seriously considered the claims of Jesus and what they really mean, if they're true, or maybe you have, but you've lost your way a little these past few years, then why don't you take the next couple of moments to reflect on what your response is going to be to the claims of Jesus. Now, if you arrive at the same conclusion that I did many years ago, that Jesus is who he said he was, then ask yourself why you are holding him at arm's length. Because as I found out, my reasons for not committing to him wholeheartedly didn't actually stack up. When I finally surrendered, I discovered that every reason that I had to hold him at arm's length disappeared, and I wondered why it had been such a struggle. Jesus said in John 11, 25 to 26, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even if he dies, and those who live and believe in me will never die. You kind of read that and you go, Jesus, you're saying two totally different things. You just said that when you die, you'll live, but if you believe in me, you'll never die. Jesus was actually touching on two different things. He's talking there about the death of the human body, but he's also making mention of the fact that we have a spirit that is eternal. And what happens to our spirit on the other side, we'll either spend eternity with our Creator doing all sorts of things. I don't think that we'll be sitting on fluffy white clouds playing harps. Hal will be playing on the electric guitar probably, but the God who created the universe, the God who created Earth, have you ever asked yourself why would God create the universe if he only populated one planet? Maybe eternity is all about humankind moving out and populating the universe. Who knows? But one thing I do know is that the God who has the creativity to create everything that we see on planet Earth has got an incredible future in store for us. In fact, the Bible says that it hasn't entered into the heart or mind of men or women what God has stored up for those who love him. You don't need faith to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. You just have to examine the facts. Did he actually come back from the dead or didn't he? If he came back from the dead, then he is who he says he was, the Son of God. If he came back from the dead, then you can place your trust in him, not just for your life here on earth, but also for what happens after. Completely and utterly. If he came back from the dead. Now, if you're a lazy thinker, and you're just kind of like, I'm just too busy with life, it's easy just to ignore the claims of Christ. I did for 21 years, 20 odd years. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic family. We went to Mass every Easter. I knew about Jesus. I knew that Jesus died, according to the stories, Jesus died on the cross. 3 days later, he came back to life. I knew all of that, but in my mind, it was like, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm just going to get on with living my life out here. And the interest, for me, one of the things that was quite interesting was, here I was doing everything that I wanted to do, but I wasn't enjoying life. And then when I came face to face with the claims of Christ at the age of, I think I was 20. I was in the army at the time. I came face to face with those claims, and I asked myself the question, do I actually believe that God is real? Do I believe that Jesus is who he says he was? Because if I do, I can't just keep pushing it off to just before I die. How stupid could I be to do that, really, when you think about it? If God is real, and he's the creator of everything, then the wisest thing you can do is to live your life with him. That's wise. That's sensible. That makes sense. And so I made a decision at the age of 20, I'm going to stop holding God at arm's length, and I'm going to actually live my life as though what I believe is actually true. And here I am about 89 years of age. So you look younger when you... Actually, Deborah reckons with a beard I look about 75, so... but here I am, 36 years later, still loving Jesus, still realising that all of the questions that I've had, he still has answers for, and that when you live with him in your life, you actually experience what life is all about. When you avoid the creator of all life, then your life is just going to be made up of what you can make up. And that's not the type of life God wants for you. Let's close our eyes just for a moment. I'm going to pray. We're going to worship Jesus once more. We're going to allow the truth of Resurrection Sunday to resonate in all of our hearts and to strengthen us for the week ahead. But I just want us just to spend this moment just to pray. To get real before God. Nobody's looking around. Nobody's looking at you. This is between you and God. The big question. Who do you say